There are hundreds, if not thousands, of videos out there about feeder fishing, and as you can expect, because there's so many people uploading content, because there's so many companies uploading content from a vast number of different anglers, one of the things that is causing quite a few problems now online, certainly that I see in my coaching days, is that lots of people are kind of confused about the options, especially regarding certain bits of tattle, certain bits of kit, and certainly the types of rigs that they choose for different scenarios. Now, I'm going to hold my hands up and say that the vast majority of things in our fishing, just like feeder rigs, is down to personal preference. However, over the last 10 years, I've had the privilege to spend a lot of time on the bank, to mix with some of the very best anglers in the world, and that's given me the opportunity to try out so many different rigs, so many different items of tattle in my feeder fishing, and gradually, as you would expect, over those 10 years I have eliminated certain things from my feeder fishing. And I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but what I can tell you is that over those 10 years the changes that I have made have completely transformed my feeder fishing. So this upload is about trying to help you out when it comes to making the selection choice for your rigs and the types of tattle and accessories that you use when you're out there feeder fishing. One of the biggest topics within feeder fishing, certainly over the last 10 years, has been the use of feeder links. I first saw these probably 9 to 10 years ago at the World Feeder Championships, and ever since then, I've experimented with them on and off, but I can absolutely be honest with you and say that over the last 3 years I haven't used a single feeder link. However, there are occasions when I think it's handy to have some with you. Now, even within some of the best anglers in the world, some of them will always use feeder links, some of them will not use feeder links. Simple as that. It's very much a personal thing, and I've yet to prove in my own fishing that feeder links are actually of benefit to my fishing. However, one of the best bits of advice I can give to anybody if they're a little bit confused or they're trying to figure out whether it's best to use them or not, is quite simply, I always say that, look, if you're not getting in tangles with your rig and if you're not missing bites, then just keep your rig how it is. Just keep doing what you're doing. But I do know that there are certain anglers, certainly if they're fishing for fast biting fish like roach, dace, sometimes perch, that they miss lots and lots of bites with any other type of a rig, and they find that with a feeder link they can hit more bites. And if you're one of those people, then by all means carry on using them. But for me, in my own fishing, I don't miss bites and I don't get in tangles, and all I use is a snap link swivel. For me, I like to keep things as simple as possible, but there have been occasions, probably over the last 5 years, when I have struggled with missed bites on certain occasions. Now, that could be a river, there's no pattern to this, I'll be absolutely honest with you, and I've switched to a feeder link and it's transformed things into me hitting more bites. Now, I've got to be absolutely honest with you and say that I'm a firm believer that feeder links can affect and improve your fishing, but for me it's more about the way that you're setting your tip and more about the way that you are actually reading your bites. There are so many variables involved in fishing, as you know. If you're missing bites, for example, if you're not able to read bites properly, it could be a combination of your hook length, the length of the hook length, the hook pattern, the bait, the feeder, the way that you're feeding. There are so many variables involved that there are lots of people out there that automatically go to the feeder link and blame it on that, when in my own fishing I've found out that yes, I might have an occasion where I've been missing bites, but without switching to a feeder link, I've found some other aspect of my rig or my feeding or the way that I'm setting my tip that has actually transformed those bites into fish in my net. So yes, I've had the luxury of being out there on the bank and had the chance to go out and experiment with my own fishing. However, if you are missing bites, if you're not able to read bites properly, try a feeder link. You might find that it will transform your own personal fishing, but for me, I just don't find the need for them most of the time. The twizzle boom has become something that's very, very popular now. There are still people out there that don't know about it, and if that's something that you're not familiar with and you don't quite know how to use a twizzle boom or create one, then there is a video at the end of this video that will talk you through of the feeder rigs that we use in lots of our fishing, and it'll show you how to produce a twizzled boom. Now, for me, if I can get away without using the twizzle boom, I will, and that's that applies to the vast majority of my fishing now. One of the things to remember is when you're talking about the length of a twizzle boom, you've got to take into consideration the actual mono or the line that you're using. Some people use fluorocarbons, some people use mono or a normal reel line. What you've got to remember is that some lines out there are much more supple than others, some are much stiffer, and obviously the diameter of your line as well will have an impact on how effective your twizzle boom is. But in a nutshell, that is something that you can experiment with at home, and by trying different lines out you can see which ones are stiffer than others. But one of the key things to remember is that don't forget, the shorter the boom, the stiffer it will be. A short boom like this one is really stiff, and if that's the effect that you're trying to create, then a shorter boom may be better for you. On the flip side of that, when you switch to a longer boom, you might find that certainly on this occasion, as you can see, depending on the mono you're using, it might not stay stiff. The longer the boom is, the more supple it will be, and it won't be as stiff, okay? And it could actually go into an arc like this one is. But the golden rule is that just make sure that the length of your boom goes past the bottom of your feeder when you're actually holding the rig up to casting. By doing that, it just means the length of the boom will stay clear and keep it nice and clean and away from any sort of snap link, swivel and the actual feeder itself, and that should help you stop getting tangles. We know now from underwater filming and through tank tests is that our rig doesn't always land exactly how we always was thought to expect it would land. And one of the common questions that I get asked quite frequently since filming some of the underwater footage is that if we want to try and straighten out our hook length once the feeder hits the bottom, why don't we put a shot on the line? A shot will help the rig stay nice and straight so that when the rig lands on the bottom, your hook length is going to be in a straighter line, so that if a fish does take your bait, you're going to be more inclined to see that bite. Now, one of the reasons why I don't do that, I don't like to put anything on the hook length, is purely because I don't want to damage the hook length in any way. By nipping a shot or a stot onto your hook length, you are in effect causing a little bit of a weakness in that line, and I don't like to do that, okay? Now, the other reason why I don't do it, and this is something that I've spoke to one or two big name anglers about, and their thought process is really the same, and that is that when we cast a feeder out, just like when you're float fishing, whether you're waggler fishing, whether you're pole fishing, you've got a hook bait on, and when that feeder goes in, we actually want, and I personally want, that hook bait to fall as naturally as possible. You know, we're trying to trick fish onto the hook all the time in fishing, and by doing that, you're just making sure that, or you're trying to ensure that your hook bait is going to fall as naturally as possible. However, if you had a shot on that line, that wouldn't be the case, would it? It'd make the hook length sink much quicker and therefore much more unnatural. So for me, I would rather keep it nice and natural. So naturally, I know there are going to be people thinking, well, are you just sitting there with your rig in a nice heap on the bottom of the lake bed? Are you happy for that? And no, that is the answer. I'm not happy with that, and that is why I'm not scared to move the feeder. By moving the feeder, even if it's only a few inches, you're going to be moving the feeder towards you, therefore moving that further away from your hook bait, and that should help straighten your hook length out. Now, there are one or two little bits of tricks and skills to do that effectively, but that's something that you can only really work out by being on the bank, and the nature of the lake bed and the type of feeder that you're using will affect how easy that feeder will move. So in answer to that question, no, I don't like to put anything on the hook length, which kind of leads us into the next topic. Hook length swivels. Now, I think these are a fantastic invention. They're a great bit of kit, and certainly now, I mean, these are size 20, which really means that they are really, really nice and small and discreet. They're a great swivel to use just so that you can quickly and easily change hook lengths. Now, I get asked a lot about this, certainly when I'm out on the bank with people, and that is why don't we see you using them in your fishing. Now, for the vast majority of my fishing, I might be fishing for skimmers, bream, roach on natural venues with a conventional feeder rig, and more often than not, I don't need to use these swivels. These are fantastic if you are going to be using different hook lengths, if you're going to be constantly changing. But to be quite honest with you, it's very rare for me to constantly be changing hook lengths. You know, we tend to start on one, and sometimes, certainly in big competitions, we might have a duplicate rod set up with a different hook length on that rod. So that is why you probably don't see me using these very often. However, the times when I do use them, I tend to use them for bigger fish. I tend to use them for when I'm hair rigging corn, or sometimes when I'm hair rigging worm. On some venues you might find yourself switching from hair rigs to different sorts of hook baits, and these are great for that because you can quickly and easily change your hook length. So when I'm targeting bigger fish, this tends to be the accessory that I use to allow me to quickly change hook lengths. However, one of the reasons why I don't use these in my natural fishing, or when I'm fishing natural venues, is because, going back to the topic that we've just discussed about a shot on the hook length, and that is by having one of these at the bottom of your rig so that you can attach your hook length to it, you are in effect again adding some weight to your hook length. And that in the first instance isn't going to act quite as natural when it goes in, when you first cast it in, because you have got a weight in the middle of your hook length between the feeder and your actual hook, okay? And the other reason is, and this is something that I've been fortunate to experiment with in the past, and that is I've been on one or two occasions, certainly when I've been roach fishing, where I've been missing bites. And when I was missing bites, I was quite confident there was some element of my rig that wasn't right. And after 2 or 3 occasions of this happening, I was going through a process of elimination, trying bigger hooks, trying different hook baits, trying different feeders, different feeding patterns, all this sort of thing. And eventually I found out what it was, is that I was using one of these hook length swivels. By taking that off the rig and just having a normal rig without any sort of attachments, where I could just attach my hook length to my main line loop to loop, I didn't miss any bites. And in my own opinion, and what I honestly felt was happening on those 2 or 3 occasions before I found this change, was that the fish was feeling the swivel when they took the bait. There are occasions when we're after really shy biting fish, and if they're only just taking the bait, sometimes they will drop the bait if they feel any resistance. You know, lots of the crossovers we talk about is the same between feeder fishing as it is pole fishing or waggler fishing. And by eliminating those swivels, I didn't miss any more bites, and I went on to catch some great nets of roach. However, having said that, there are occasions when I will use this on natural venues, and that tends to be when I'm using baits like double caster. Sometimes when you're speed fishing, sometimes we feed lots and lots of casters, and as you can imagine, when you're feeding 2, 3, 4 pints of casters, fish can get preoccupied with those, and it can soon often be the case that the caster is the only bait that you can actually catch on going into the later stages of sessions like that. And on those scenarios, then that's when I will use one of these, because these will help prevent spin up. So if you're one of those anglers that, if you are speed fishing, if you like to retrieve your feeder really quickly, or if you're fishing at range, if you are suffering from spin ups, these can help cut down on that, because the swivel built into them will help stop your hook length spinning up. And the final really popular question that I get asked a lot is when I'm talking about my preferences as regards what type of feeder to use on certain scenario, why would I always choose to use a side weighted feeder where possible? Now, for me, and the opinion of lots of feeder anglers, is that the best way to present your feeder on any sort of a lake bed or a river bed is with a side weighted feeder. If you're not familiar with these feeders, it basically means it's a feeder that's got the lead or the weight on the side. Now, they sit on the bottom much better than lots of other feeders. Lots of venues that we fish sometimes can suffer from a soft bottom, or they can be silty bottoms, or they could be weed. Feeders like this are going to sit much better actually on the bottom. So if you can get a feeder like that to where you want to fish, then these are the best way to present your bait. Now, the reason for that is because certain other feeders like this one, that is a weight forward feeder, or that's what we refer to it to, and again another weight forward feeder. These are designed for a reason, and they're designed to cut through the air with the weight going forward, which means it's going to help you achieve more distance. Now, these feeders aren't only about distance, these feeders are about cutting down on drag when you cast them. So whilst these, and lots of people assume that these feeders are designed for fishing at range, the basic idea of these is it's going to enable you to reach your required range much easier. So we don't only use these when we're trying to fish at range, but we can use these when the wind is bad as well. Because they're so aerodynamic, they will cut through the wind much easier and help you be much more accurate. However, depending on how you heat your clip and depending on how soft or hard the bottom of the lake bed is, it can determine how are these presented on the bottom. Now, as you can see, they are actually sat there now. That one on a hard bottom will sit on its side like that, and that's great. If you're fishing on a hard bottom, these feeders are alright because they're always going to land on the side like that, and that's great. That means it's fishing properly. However, on soft bottoms, and certainly if you're not hitting your clip quite right, these can easily stick in the bottom upright. As you can imagine, you know, if it's a soft bottom, if your line isn't under loads and loads of tension as you hit your clip and the feeder is arcing back towards you, if that's not under tension and the feeder's going virtually vertical, then that will fall vertical and that will literally stick in the bottom of a lake bed. And we know this because obviously from underwater filming, but we also know that when you come to retrieve the feeder or try to move the feeder, your rod bends round and the feeder's stuck in the bottom, and then suddenly it'll go free. And that is why. It's because your feeder's sticking in the bottom. So when there's a really soft bottom, these aren't quite as good. Just like these weight forward feeders as well, exactly the same principle. Because of the weight of where it is, it's going to fall vertically unless you put it under loads of tension, which is going to encourage it to land on its side. Okay, and this is why when we're fishing on softer bottoms, we don't like to use these feeders if we can get away with it. So we would always go for the side weighted feeder. However, and the important point that I need to finish on is that, just like I was taught 10 years ago, sometimes we have to sacrifice presentation in order to get to where the fish are. Dean Barlow taught me this 10 years ago. There's no point in having a beautifully presented side weighted feeder like that on the bottom if you're presenting it in an area where there isn't any fish. If all the fish are at 60 meters, it's alright trying to present this feeder in the best possible fashion at 30 meters. If the fish aren't there, then that's no good, is it? So sometimes we have to sacrifice presentation in order to get to where the fish are. So sometimes you might have to fish on a soft bottom if the wind's bad with a feeder like this, just purely because it's the only feeder that you can get there. But that is why we carry different design feeders for different scenarios. I've been really fortunate in the sense that over the last 10 years I've been able to go out and expel a lot of these myths, a lot of the theories behind feeder fishing, and I'm not saying any of these are right or wrong, but what I'm saying to you is that these changes that I've made within my fishing have completely transformed my fishing, and I'm hoping that you're going to get something out of this, because most people don't get the advantage to spend loads and loads of time on the bank trying these things out. If you're not that familiar with feeder rigs, there is a video right here that is going to show you 10 very simple feeder rigs that we use in lots of our fishing. And once again, this has been another video on the Catch Fishing channel that I really hope is going to help you catch more fish, and hopefully you're going to enjoy your fishing even more.